Alrighty, hello everybody. So we are going to go through lesson 8. This video is going to help you with numbers 1 through 15. And then tomorrow I'm going to post a video about this part where naming gets a little bit more complicated. So the way these Pogles work is really just looking at what information they're giving you. They give you these models and then you answer the questions. It's pretty straightforward. All the answers are here. You just have to read the questions closely and then write what you know, write what you can do. Lesson 7 also helped you with writing chemical formulas, so use what you learned there here as well, okay? So first we have this model, model 1. It shows us ion charges for selected elements. So here we're seeing all of the ions that various elements of the periodic table are going to form. So over here on this side, see down here, we're forming positive ions, so those are going to be called cations. And then over here on the right side of the periodic table where we move into the nonmetals, these are going to form negative ions. So these are going to be called anions. So for number 1, it's like identify 3 elements that form only one cation. So we're looking for positive and only one type. So there's only one type here, one type here. Anything from here is a good answer. And then 3 elements that form more than one cation, for example, would be these things. See how there are different charges for like iron, nickel, and copper? That's more than one cation these elements are capable of forming. So then we get into writing down the chemical formulas of some of these elements using what we're given in terms of what ions they're able to form. So we're going to consider ions of potassium and sulfur and write chemical formulas for all the possible ionic compounds using the simplest ratios. So potassium, we see here, it forms a positive cation, okay? Only one type. And then sulfur over here, this S, it's going to form a negative anion, but it's a -2 charge. Because only each of these elements can only form one type of ion, that means there's only one possible ionic compound they can form. So positive cation, negative anion, they don't cancel out, so we're going to do the crisscross method. So that 1 is going to go after the S, and then that 2 is going to go after the K. So if we're going over here, it's going to be potassium, 2, sulfur. And because the sulfur has a charge of -2, we need 2 positive potassiums to cancel that out. What about for iron and sulfur? So that's number 3. So consider iron and sulfur. What are the possible compounds for these 2 elements? If we look at our first model, iron forms 2 different types of positive ions, 2 cations. It forms a +2 cation and a +3 cation. So if we're combining iron with sulfur, if we combine this, the +2 with the -2, those cancel out. That means it's just going to be iron and then sulfur. So I'm going to write that here. With the +2 cation, it's going to be Fe and then S because +2 cancels out a -2. But another type of cation can be formed by iron, a +3 cation. That doesn't cancel out with a -2 anion for sulfur. So here, because it doesn't cancel out, we're going to do the crisscross method. That 3 is going to go after the S, and then that 2 is going to go after the Fe. So it's going to be Fe2S3, which is iron 3 sulfide. So it's going to be Fe2S3. So that means you need 2 + 3 charges, so that's a total of +6 for the iron, to balance out 3 -2 charges, a total of -6, because +6 cancels out -6. That's an acceptable compound if this iron forms a +3 cation. You're gonna just keep answering these questions, use the models. It's really straightforward. Email me if you have questions about those. And they're gonna ask you to explain ratios of elements, explain them in terms of charge. They have to cancel out always to 0. But one thing I wanted to talk about is as we move towards naming, there are a couple activities where you're naming these ionic compounds. If only one form, if a element only forms one kind of ion, the naming is really simple. You say the name of the metal, or the first one, the cation, and then you say the name of the anion, or the nonmetal, but instead of ending in oxygen, you end it in ide, so oxide. So, for example, this is lithium, so I type lithium. And then instead of oxygen, because it's an ionic compound, what we do to name ionic compounds is we end it in ide, I-D-E, so that's lithium oxide. Same for this, magnesium. And then instead of fluorine, which is the F, we say magnesium fluoride, right? You might have been to the dentist and they give you fluoride. That's because they're giving you the ion form of fluorine, fluoride. Make sure it's super easy. Both elements' names except the anion ends in ide, I-D-E. So hopefully that's going to be helpful enough to answer 1 through 15. Tomorrow I'm going to post a video for the rest of lesson 8. Let's see if I can end this video. Oop.